Hello, I'm Rebecca, the founder of triiyo, and welcome to PEP Talks with triiyo. triiyo is the leading solution for workplaces to support their people during every life transition, from starting a family to retiring and every life event in between. On PEP Talks with triiyo, we chat to our expert partners for advice on how to best navigate these common, complex, and often messy life stages that happen during our working career. Keep listening as we connect the dots between life and work with the simple aim of education and empowerment. After all, life happens at work. Today on PEP Talks with triiyo, we're speaking with one of our retirement experts, Dr. Jon Glass, retirement coach from 64 Plus. Jon, lovely to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you for the welcome.
It's a pleasure to have you. Would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself and the work you do at 64 Plus?
Certainly. I stopped full-time work about 8+ years ago. And at first I was a bit confused about what to do next. And then with a bit of consideration and having done some training as a counsellor coach, I decided to help myself to help others, by which I mean to say to become a retirement coach, an extremely rare profession, one that I hope grows over time and which I will explain in more detail later. But for the last 6 or so years, I've been operating 64 Plus, my retirement coaching business.
Okay, amazing. Now, I would imagine not many people know retirement coaches exist. I mean, I certainly didn't until we were introduced. And I'd love to know the issues that people have when they move into retirement. And I know you've previously shared with me the 3D's, which is depression, divorce, and downsizing. So could you tell me a little bit more, maybe some statistics around what happens to people when, across those 3 areas when they do choose to retire, and we'll delve into it in a bit more detail.
Okay, so I chose the 3Ds deliberately just to give a bit of zing to the presentation, because divorce and depression are obviously words that capture people's attention. Downsizing is more mundane. And I didn't want to introduce divorce and depression to make the audience feel down. Far from it. More to slice in some stats. Now, what I've been able to find is that the divorce rate recently in Australia has been on the increase. Around 2% is the number I found. And particularly, it's a condition that occurs more and more often amongst people who've been married for more than a couple of decades. So we're already potentially in the realm of people about to retire or in retirement. So for me, the age group of people I deal with is around 55 to 70. So that's a stat for divorce. Now, depression is a much hotter topic, and I'm not a mental health expert, but the stat I saw is that around 5% of people over the age of 60 suffer from some kind of depression. So I raised divorce and depression because these are conditions where I think a retirement coach can be helpful to a client. Again, not because I'm a mental health professional as such, nor a marriage counsellor, but in ways that I hope to be able to explain as we go through this podcast. So very quickly, downsizing, we all know about that. It's probably what people ought to do when the last child has left home. Not everyone does. I've heard of some people who build even bigger houses. But most people downsize. I myself...
For the grandchildren, I'm sure.
I'm sure that's right. My trajectory has been to move from a house to an apartment, and I'm really glad I did it. So those were the 3Ds that I wanted to put out there for your audience to think about.
And do you see mostly men when you're in your retirement coaching space? I'd imagine in terms of the sort of demographics of the people that are retiring now may be different when we, in another 20 odd years. But would you say it's mostly men that you're seeing that are retiring, and they've had that traditional stereotype of the male has been within the household, the person that works, and then potentially their partner has taken more of the role where they look after the home and they raise the family?
Yes, is the simple answer. My clients are predominantly, but by no means exclusively, male. Yeah. And I think you've put your finger on it. It's simply the path that our society is moving through, and perhaps with more women in the workforce, retirement coaches will entertain as many men as they do women, and as many women as they do men as clients. But one interesting angle I'll give to this, which has happened to me more times than I'd care to mention, is that a wife, and if I seem to be talking traditionally about husbands and wives, I can't really apologise. I'm pretty sure the majority
the demographic
situation
that we're
in
in
this
at
country,
this point in time, isn't it?
But I by no means am attempting to exclude people who don't fit into that framework. So what I've had happen to me so often is that a wife will phone me and say, John, my husband needs your help. And the first few times I got very excited, but I learned to treat that with the caution it needs to be treated with. It's like a hot potato. The husband, who the wife promises will call me, he never calls.
Yeah.
And I can only imagine the conversation. You think I need help? I don't think I need help. I'm going into the work shed or something.
Yeah. So let's look at one of those areas. Let's look at the depression one, because I would imagine if we take that typical stereotype, somebody's had a career for 40 odd years, say, and, that's our identity. Our professional world is our identity. Do you find that people prepare for their retirement in terms of what I'm going to do next, or they just know there's this dating time where I'm going to retire and it comes and then they move into this retirement phase? And is that, does depression come in because they've lost their purpose has changed, or because they haven't got something to get up and, go out to work for every day? Yeah. Where does this sort of come in? And if we're talking to people that are planning their retirement, what do they need to think around, or what can they do to sort of potentially alleviate that problem?
Yeah. Excellent points. And if it's okay with you at this stage, I'll step back from using the D for depression word and simply talk about people having an adjustment to a fulfilling, happy retirement.
Yeah.
Which obviously is a bigger category and the one that I deal with. That's the goal. So how does that come about? And you've said it very well. There's a big component of identity that's connected with people's work lives. There's something as mundane and simple as the routine of going to work, let's say traditionally Monday to Friday. Those things can evaporate in retirement space. And it's in their evaporation, a bit like a lake being empty, that the natural life of fish ceases to exist. And the answer, and this is what retirement coaches do, I believe, is to help the client to effectively reinvent themselves and become a retired person. And the way I put it to my clients is like this: when you worked, or perhaps they're still working, you have a business card. I know those are going out of fashion, but let's assume it's back in the 1980s again. And on that card, apart from the paraphernalia of your phone number and where you work, is something called a title, which could be extremely grand. So, client, tell me the kind of title you'd like to have on your card in retirement. Would you like to have retired person? No. And that's the point, to fill out those categories. And retirement coaching, to come back to your original question, is all about helping the client to find her or his meaning, purpose, whatever you want to call it, in retired life. Because once that's established, then the outworkings of that in terms of, I want to do social work, I want to study, I want to look after grandchildren. These things are very personal. And as a coach, I'm simply facilitating an answer, not directing it, not giving it. Once that's achieved, then meaning and purpose become fulfilled, and life in retirement becomes fulfilling.
Yeah, absolutely. So really the support or the areas that anyone planning their retirement needs to kind of preempt is, what am I going to do next? Is, gardening or golf going to be enough? Yeah. Is that going to be enough for, the change of my identity? Or do I actually need to consider other things to keep my brain ticking over and to give my life meaning and purpose? That's essentially what you're saying.
Oh, in a nutshell. And yeah. I think that brings into play the whole concept of time. And some people, as they approach retirement or get into retirement, some people are very fearful of what they'll do with that huge hole, that black hole of time, which they never thought about, because you hardly went to work in your 30s and said to the boss, I don't know what to do today, boss. It's not something you would say to your boss. But some people have a deep fear and aversion to the free time. Others say, yay, I've got 7 days a week to do a whole lot of stuff, and I'm going to get to it because I know my purpose and meaning, and therefore their retirement is just a wonderful gift to them rather than a bogey person. I think I had to say bogey person.
Yeah. And so when we look at the next D, divorce, it's a little bit like the last 2 years, we found ourselves, I won't say stuck at home with our partners, but, we found ourselves in that single space with another person. And if we take the traditional people, that sort of traditional stereotype where maybe one person did go out to work and one person was at home for a majority of that time frame. And now the retiree finds themselves at home, maybe slightly unfulfilled or frustrated after a period of time. Yeah. And then, obviously say, the partner is at home and suddenly, their life and their day-to-day has also changed. Is that where it's worthwhile couples actually having this conversation before the retirement date to say, what is this going to look like? What do you do every day? What do I do every day? How do we want to exist as a couple, as a partnership within this new phase of life? Do people actually have those conversations? Is that something that's valuable to do, to almost get themselves, on a new path, but the same path, which is a new trajectory and a new chapter in their life?
Yes, absolutely. And one of the most important initial meetings I can have with the client is to meet the client with their partner, just for that first session, because then without doubt, you'll find you can very quickly as a coach uncover some points of view that are opposed to each other. The husband says, I'm going to spend my retirement playing golf. And the wife says, well, hang on a second. We have other obligations. And by the way, I'd like to see you sometimes. I'm parodying the whole thing. Yeah. But that's why I think the divorce stat is relevant, because of another factor, which is that people, again, in these traditional marriage relationships can get to that 60 years of age. They're married, they've had a long marriage, they've had a mortgage, which they've paid off, they've had child or children who have left home. And that can lead to a longing, yearning look across the dining room table one evening where no one says anything, but what they're thinking is, what now? And so I don't raise divorce because I think it's a good thing. I raise divorce because I think a retirement coach can help a couple to reinvigorate their life together in retirement, and a very useful way to get them thinking, because again, I'm not directional, I'm more asking the right questions, is to put to them, okay, you now have downsized. I've got in the third D without even trying. You've downsized, you're in this small apartment. Okie dokie, how will you share that space? Will you sit at the kitchen table all day long together on your computers looking at Facebook? Maybe, but just let's think that through, let's talk it through, because there might be some other ways of dealing with that small space issue you now have in a life together that you now have that could be quite clever, such as someone establishes a beachhead in the local coffee shop and goes there every day for 2 hours, for example.
Yeah, that's true, isn't it? Because not only have you got either one partner or both partners now, sort of giving up work and spending a lot more time together, which perhaps, 24/7 hadn't necessarily happened. But suddenly if you have downsized, you've moved out of the larger home, maybe where there's a garden or a shed that you can kind of escape to, and have your own space and time. But suddenly now you've downsized. And even if those conversations haven't happened before the downsize, where do you go? Like, how do you reconfigure the relationship so that, you can reset the boundaries, reset expectations, and continue moving forward?
Yes, and that's why discussion is the way. That's why coaching can work. It's because the coach asks the right questions, listens carefully to the answers, and gives gentle nudges to the client to get their thinking in order. So I would say the most encouraging signal I ever get from a client is when they say to me, I've never thought about that before. Then I breathe a sigh of, well, I've done something here. I've never thought about that before, and that's a good thing. So that's the direction a coach takes. And I'll say two things here. I'll try to give a very loose definition of what a coach actually does to confirm things I've said before. But before that, I have this slogan that everybody thinks they're an expert in retirement. It's funny, isn't it? The world is full of, I'm talking about people in their 50s and 60s, not 20-year-olds. They're all experts. And you think, how can that be? I mean, I claim to have some expertise in a small number of subjects, but there's a gazillion things I know nothing about. So why do we all focus on this? I'm an expert in retirement. I don't need any help, when help could be exactly what you need. And I'm not arguing that everybody should have a retirement coach. There are some people who are able to think through their own retirement on their own or with their family, and everything's fine. But I think a lot more people could do with the help than are prepared to own up to it. And if I could just give a definition of coach for those who've never really thought it through, I like to start with the definition of a sporting coach, because we all have a very good idea of what a sporting coach does, from organisation through motivation through shoulder to cry on. In a sense, a retirement coach is no different, but we don't operate on a sporting field. We operate on the internet or face-to-face. So it's all about, as I keep saying, asking good questions, listening to the answers to help the client guide herself or himself to a position where they can look forward and say, I think I will have a fulfilling retirement.
And I think with coaching, it's asking those questions, particularly when you've got two people in a room, to encourage conversation, which potentially they won't necessarily have, or they're the awkward questions. And also, you don't know what you don't know. So you don't really necessarily know what you should be thinking about to even have those discussions, because like you say, most people just think retirement's going to come naturally. I'm just going to fall into it and, it's going to be a breeze. But clearly it isn't a breeze for some people. So having somebody to facilitate conversations, I think that's one of the biggest gems of coaching.
Of course, I agree. And can I amplify your comments? I like to talk about the 3 pillars of retirement. And the first two are, I think, uncontroversial. Retired people think about their finances, however they have those constituted and set up. It's obvious. Retired people think about their physical health, as they should, and it's obvious. Why aren't more people thinking about what I call the 3rd pillar of retirement, which is emotional health? And perhaps part of that is that society has never encouraged them to think about their emotional health for the last 50 years. So why should they start now? And my response to that is there's no better time to start than right now.
Yeah. I mean, that emotional health is critical, isn't it? The emotional mental health, but potentially the barriers around that are generational. Men coming into retirement age weren't always raised to show their emotions or openly talk about how they're feeling. It's changing a lot now, and as it should do. But I guess therefore you're also addressing barriers that are very uncomfortable for a lot of people, to talk about their feelings, and perhaps that feeling of, marriages breaking down or not feeling fulfilled, and also not knowing what to do, because I think, by the time you get to retirement, a lot of men feel like, well, I should just know this. It should just come naturally. But then admitting that actually I'm now lost, I'm 3-6 a year into my retirement, and actually I'm either bored or I'm unsatisfied. And admitting that to oneself can actually be quite hard, I would imagine, for specifically this generation that you're working with.
And unfortunately, and you've alluded to this, society at large doesn't give any help, because if it did, there'd be some established, and sorry to use an investment term, that's my background, some established benchmarks of retirement performance. And I'm not trying to turn it into a football match where you rack up a score and you win, but more have a sense society-wide of what a fulfilling retirement can look like. And there's no one answer, but maybe a dozen answers. Here are some fulfilling retirements. Now, before you self-declare as an expert in the emotional aspects of retirement, have a look at these other examples and have a think. And I reckon that would be very useful to a lot of people. But as far as I'm concerned, I've never seen those sorts of benchmarks promulgated in our society.
Yeah. Jon, I've loved talking to you, and I think it's an amazing topic because, you know, you sort of get to that phase of life and we still have, after retirement, a huge amount of life to live. So I think, you know, being able to really address what is this next chapter, what is this next phase of life look like for me, and having somebody like yourself, or at least being able to ask those questions of oneself, you know, what does this look like? What do I need to do? You know, if you can keep your marriage and everything else in a fulfilling life going, then great. So I think it's amazing to be able to have these tools and these questions to ask yourself before things start breaking down, so that, you know, people can move into that next chapter and continue progressing just in a completely different trajectory. Exactly. Well put. And thank you so much for your questions and your comments. Thank you so much for joining me, Jon. I look forward to talking to you again, and we'll speak soon. Thank you for listening. To find out more about how triiyo can support your people, visit triiyo.com.